So, welcome everyone again. Um, I'd also like to remind everyone that we do have a function for closed captions. So you can turn that on by clicking on the top right of your screen, and then you click on language and speech, and you're going to have an option to turn on live captions. This is just going to turn on live subtitles at the bottom of your screen, so that could be helpful for some people, and only you will be able to see this. Today's workshop, we are joined by Maria and Clara from Northern Trust. Maria is going to share a few tips on how to write a great CV that stands out, but really fits into what is expected in Ireland as well. Because a lot of times people do have a really strong CV that could have been used in other countries, but it doesn't match the kind of guidelines that are expected here. Having a really good CV is really going to help your chances of being called for an interview. So I recommend that you pay a lot of attention today, and you put in the time after the session today as well to go through your CV, make the required changes. We're going to send you our CV guide, our CV template, and another video tutorial as well. So if you are struggling with anything, do rely on these materials because they are very good, and they were built specifically for migrants, for people who come from other work cultures and might need that additional support. We also have the employment expert session, so do reach out to me. You have been getting emails from me throughout this process this last week. So do reply to that and just let us know that you want to book a session with an employment expert, and we'll do that. So we are going to have time at the end for questions. Sorry, someone just changed the spoken language to Ukrainian. You actually have to keep that as English because I'm speaking English. So I'm gonna update that, and it does update for everyone the spoken language. I think you might be able to change the subtitle language, but I'll check that and I'll write on the chat if we can. But please don't change the spoken language. Lydia, you might want to. So we have Lydia here from Open Doors today, who does speak Ukrainian and Russian. So if you do have any questions, do type them on the chat, and Lydia will address them. Lydia, if you wouldn't mind translating what I just said on the chat there, just so if anyone didn't catch that, they will have that on the chat as well. So we will reply to questions. Clara will be replying to most of the questions on the chat. If you have questions about the program, Lydia and I can reply to those. And by the end, we will have a Q&A session, so then you can come on the mic and ask your questions as well. But during the presentation, I'll ask that you keep your microphone muted, please. So without taking any more of your time, I'd like to ask Maria to come on and deliver the training and also share a little bit more about Northern Trust, who is a member of Open Doors and have been working with us for a few years now. So Maria, on to you.
Great, thanks, Talita. So just want to start by introducing myself and my colleague Clara. So my name is Maria Nyan. I work in the talent acquisition team in Northern Trust, Ireland, looking after all recruitment across the kind of European region. I've been working at Northern Trust now for coming up to 6 years. So I have a lot of experience with, I suppose, looking at CVs and knowing, what makes a good CV, what maybe doesn't make a good one. So I'll give a lot of examples throughout that will hopefully, help you. Working with me today is my colleague Clara Hart. Clara has been working in Northern a lot longer than me, so has really, really good experience too in this field. So as Talisha said, don't be shy at all to ask questions in the chat. I know it can be a little bit nerve-wracking asking them, throughout, like by talking. So any questions at all, just throw them into the chat, and Clara will answer them. So first thing I want to do is, obviously we are from Northern Trust, so I just want to give a little bit of a background as to us as a company. Some of you may have heard of us in the past. We're a multinational, so we are based in many global countries. So we're based in 26 global locations. We have over 30,000 staff worldwide. We are ourselves, we're based in Ireland. We have 3 locations in Ireland, two offices in Limerick and 1 in Dublin. And what we do is we're basically a funds company. So we would be similar to, I'm not sure if you heard of the likes of State Street. We would be a bank. We wouldn't be a general retail bank in terms of, coming in, withdrawing money, etc. Instead, we would more manage people's funds of all, different ranges of clients. Just to focus on Ireland. So in Ireland, we have over 1,800 staff. We are based in Limerick and in Dublin. Myself and Clara are based in the Limerick office. The Limerick office is something we're very proud of, in that I suppose it's not a typical funds hub, you could say. It's a small city in the southwest of Ireland, but we've grown the Limerick business from it opened its doors in 2007. And back then it had something like only 15 people there. And now in Limerick today, we have 1,400 people. So that's something that we're very proud of. And in terms of, I suppose, in giving people employment opportunities as well in the southwest of Ireland. So that's something that we're very proud of as well. These are just some pictures of our offices, just to throw them in. Of the Limerick office and the Dublin office. But yeah, that's just a little bit about what we do. So I'm going to jump straight in now to the CV part of the presentation. As I said, any questions throughout, just throw them into the chat and we will get back to them. It's no problem at all. So a couple of things I want to mention about your CV format. So that's what I'm going to start off with, first of all. So I'm going to, I suppose, break it down in terms of the different headings that you would have on a CV. So the first heading would be your education. So some people put this at the beginning of their CV. I've never put this in, let's say, the middle of your CV. Most people would put it right at the beginning, or else maybe it's most popular, I think, at the beginning. But you could also put it at the end, but most people would put it at the beginning. So what I would do with your education is start with your highest level. So if, let's say, you went to, primary school, secondary school, you went to university, and then you, let's say, did a master's in university as well, I would be starting with the master's sections. Start with the most senior education, definitely. Do include the qualification and the institution. So it's important. You'd be surprised the amount of CVs I see that said maybe University of Limerick Business Studies, and they maybe don't, or even, to be honest, like University of Limerick, and not even like any detail about the course. So it's very important that you do put down what grade you got, the year that that you qualified, and a bit of detail about the institution. Include the completion dates, as I mentioned. And if not completed, flag this. So I can't stress how important that this is, in that if let's say you were to do maybe a 4-year degree course, and maybe you did 2 years of it and then it wasn't for you and you switched to another degree course, that is completely fine. We do see people who have maybe had that journey, and that's totally fine. But at the end of the day, you did do those 2 years in that course, so you can put it down, but just make sure you flag that you didn't complete the course, because let's say the employer could be maybe checking these details, and then it might come up actually that you didn't complete this, and that could be a problem at this stage. So do be upfront and transparent in terms of this on your CV. It's very important to translate all details like course names and university names. So we would see a lot of, obviously, candidates who maybe studied abroad, or maybe studied in universities that we haven't heard of, and a lot of people might still have the university down in the language of the country that it's from. So do always translate the course name and the course detail into English or into the language that you're applying for, because otherwise people won't know what it is and people may need to Google that detail. So to make it easier, it's good to just translate that. It's also good to include a short description of the university if it's not well known. It's very common that we would see CVs whereby let's say there's numerous let's say, you know, education detail on the CV, and we have to actually just go off and Google some of it, like what is this college, how big is it, you know, what's this course, etc. So definitely put down detail if it's not, let's say, well known. Like, again, for example, we hire a lot of people from the University of Limerick. We would know what the University of Limerick is, but certain maybe very small, you know, colleges abroad we wouldn't have heard of. So it's good to keep them, you know, have a description on them, basically. Before I move on to employment, there is one thing I want to mention that I should have mentioned at the start, actually, and that is around personal details. So you should always have at the top of your CV personal details. So all that you should really have down is, I see a lot of CVs and they might have, let's say, name, date of birth, address, you know, email, all those things. All you need to have down is just your name and your contact details. You know, it's irrelevant things like, let's say, marital status. We don't need to know that. That's not relevant to the hiring process. Address, we don't actually need to know your address either. You can put down your address if you want to, but I do find if we're, let's say, looking at CVs and let's say they apply for a role in Limerick and their address is, I don't know, Donegal or something, we might, you know, that will come into our mind, why are they applying or whatever when they live so far away. So it's just not relevant detail where you live. So I just keep it to name, contact details, so your email and your phone number. So to move on to the employment section of the presentation. So with the employment, good to go in chronological order. So start with the most recent. Some CVs, you'd be surprised the amount of CVs I see whereby they are starting with, they're starting from the beginning, like from their, you know, employment, let's say straight out of school or straight out of college. So yeah, there's no need to do that. It's better to start with the most recent so that they can, that is, I suppose, reviewed first, definitely. It should be put into company, position title, and employment dates. Similar to the education part of the CV. So if the company is definitely not well known, or, you know, maybe it's from you know, a place abroad or something like that, do give a very brief detail about the company. So you're basically trying to avoid the recruiter having to put pieces of the jigsaw together and kind of have to get information themselves. So you'd be surprised, like, the amount of CVs that we see and we have to Google things like, I've not heard of this university, I've not heard of this course, I've not heard of this company. The company could be a, you know, a multinational, or it could be a family-owned company with two people. We aren't to know unless you specify that in your CV. The most important piece of the CV or of the employment piece will be your responsibilities for the role. So with this, what I would say is there is a happy medium. So I would not put down no detail. Some people do that. They just put down the job title and the you know, the employment dates, and they don't put down any detail at all. Having said that, I wouldn't go into too much detail either. So I wouldn't go into, you know, like 20 bullet points. It's just not going to be right. The happy medium would definitely be kind of 7 to 8 bullet points on the role and the responsibilities. So, you know, just try to get as much as you can covered in those 7 to 8 bullet points. Anything more than that, it's just not going to be covered in such a small, in someone just looking at a CV. So I would always keep it to kind of 7 to 8. Very important as well that if you're going back a long time, so if let's say you're going to a role like 10 years ago, I would just put down the company title and the dates will suffice. So like an example of that, like for me, I finished college 10 years ago now. So I would have done an internship when I was in college as a HR administrator. So on my CV, because that's so long ago, I just have down HR administrator, the company name, and I just have small detail like did a 9-month internship here throughout my college degree in HR administration, such as, X, Y, and Z. That's all I have. For an employment like that, that's over 10 years old, there's no point in me putting down, 10, 12 bullet points. They're just not going to be covered. And I suppose that experience is more led to your experience to date that is more relevant and more important to cover. It's very nice also on a CV, and a very good tip to have 2 to 3 bullet points on your achievements per role. So you could have, let's say, your position down, your key responsibilities, and then you can have another little heading saying key achievements under the role. So that could be anything like maybe a new initiative that you implemented, like a process improvement initiative, or maybe a project you looked after. Yeah, anything like that that's kind of, let's say, value adding and transformational, that it's not something about the day-to-day of the role, but something that actually you maybe made a difference with, that was kind of an achievement. I'd put that in, but again, I would keep it to 2 to 3 bullet points max. Always good to outline any gaps in the CV. That's completely fine. So again, with a CV, you're trying to relay information to the recruiter or to the manager that they don't have to put the pieces of the jigsaw together, as I said. So if let's say have maybe a gap in your CV of over, a year or 2 years, or we get a CV and let's say the person hasn't worked for maybe 10 years, again, that's completely fine, but just maybe have a statement in it, took a 6-month career break or whatever it might be, just so that they're like, okay, they weren't working at that time, that's fine. So I would outline that as well. The smaller, so those are definitely the 2 most important pieces of your CV. Employment is absolutely the most important. Education then would be after that. Skills. So skills would be a different heading of the CV again. So skills, so I would include systems knowledge, the things like your Microsoft Office suite, any language skills, and any in-house training. What I mean by skills is, another good example would be, so I work as a recruiter. So a big thing, and this is just my own example, a big thing with working as a recruiter is the systems that you use. So for example, LinkedIn Recruiter, or Taleo, which is a system from Oracle, or Workday. So because I've used them, let's say if I was looking for a job in the morning, I would know that employers would want to know, okay, what systems is she trained in? So I will put those down. So, skilled in Workday, Taleo, and, LinkedIn Recruiter. So that will come into other things like, I don't know what all your fields are, but like working in IT or whatever it is, you have to ask yourself, in this field, what are the key systems that employers are going to look for, and make sure that you have them noted so that they stand out. Things like the Microsoft Office suite as well are very good to have, language skills, and any in-house training as well. Interests is a lovely area. Again, I would keep it brief. So I wouldn't go into too much detail with the interest, but it is a very nice heading tab just to give a little bit of color about the person. That because at the end of the day, they're looking at your CV, they don't know anything about you. So it would be nice to put down, you know, volunteering or extracurricular activities. So, you know, you could put down, you know, really enjoy traveling, or what cycling or whatever it is, or, you know, you volunteered at your local, whatever you volunteered at, any kind of achievements like that are really nice to see. Like maybe somebody has, I don't know, climbed, you know, a mountain, or climbed, I don't know, Everest, or well, that's kind of rare, but or you know, cycled a certain charity cycle for money, or anything like that is actually quite nice to see. But I would keep it brief, but definitely do include it. Um, the final section of the CV then are references. So I would just always put down references available upon request. That's all you need to do. Nowadays, when people do look for your references, they will look for it at kind of offer stage. So at offer stage, they might need to verify your employment and verify your references. So no need at all to have people named, basically, because they won't be contacting them at that point, basically. So the next thing I'm going to move on to, so this piece I like to make, I suppose, interactive. Sometimes when I cover this, I say to people, you can either speak on this call, or else you can just put them into the chat, whatever suits. But this is basically like an interactive experience. So this is an example of a bad CV. So what I always ask people to do at this point is to just take a moment, so maybe 30 seconds or a minute, to just look at the CV from beginning to end, and see, can you see why this CV is maybe not so good, and maybe what you would change. So I'm just going to give you a minute to do that. And what I'll do, if it's okay, Clara, is you can either say them out loud on the call, that's no problem. But if you want to put them in the chat, that's fine. And maybe, Clara, you can call out some of them from the chat as they come in. So just take a moment to look at this CV. So I'm not sure if I actually can't see the chat because I'm in presentation mode. But is there any thoughts or any comments coming through?
Nothing on the chat yet, Maria, but I don't know if anybody wants to come off mute. Any kind of initial observations as to what might kind of contradict some of the advice Maria has given?
Don't be shy. So I might just go through it, and totally fine if you don't want to note anything. But what I'll do is I'll just go through it from start to finish and note a couple of things, because a CV like this, you'd be surprised, you know, the amount of CVs that we actually do receive that are quite like this. Maybe not as bad as it, but still do have a lot of things on it that could be improved. So the first thing, to start off at the start, so Mark Taylor. So firstly, this guy, he doesn't need to include his address. That's quite a minor thing to note, though. He has his telephone, he has his email, so that's all fine. These details here need to be taken out. So his date of birth, we don't need to know. That's not, relevant at all to put in a CV nowadays. His nationality, his gender, and his marital status. So all those things can be taken out firstly. One thing I do, oh, go on, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, Maria, there's a few suggestions coming through in the chat that I might just share as well.
Yeah, sure,
that's
go
okay.
for it.
Yeah, so Hibaz pointed out that the email address is not the most professional
Very
to
good.
start
I
with.
actually missed that.
So that could be updated to something a little bit more appropriate. And I think it's often quite useful to have a dedicated email address just for your job search. It helps to keep things organized as well. Education with marks included are not particularly relevant because the qualifications may not necessarily correspond to the position you're applying for. Some people have said it's a little difficult to read. All the sections are not related or not in order. And as you were just kind of working through there, Maria, that there's too much personal information, really taking up probably the first half of the CV before you can kind of get into the specific responsibilities. So a couple of people have mentioned that as well.
Great, and thank you for those things you've noted. Those are all very accurate. So that's very true. I didn't actually see the email, but something like maybe an email address you set up when you were 16, or you were in college, cool guy or cool chick or whatever it might be. They wouldn't reflect well. So that's definitely something to note there. One thing I do like that he has put in is he has put a little personal summary at the start. So that's actually always a nice thing to put in. But if you read it, it's very poor. So he says here, I'm a hardworking individual who enjoys working. I'm excellent at meeting deadlines. I have 2 years of experience in business. It's very, very vague, very kind of copy and paste. It doesn't tell us a lot about him. It doesn't give us any color as to kind of what he's looking for. I'm going to cover the personal summary piece in the next part of the presentation. But a proper personal summary there, what your personal summary is it's nearly like a mini cover letter, or it's just like setting the scene as to what you are and what you're looking for. So like a proper personal summary there would be, Mark Taylor, 8 years of IT experience, targeting a role in X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. Key achievements are blah, blah, blah. It needs to be very to the point, very accurate, very, data-driven, example-driven, and concise. But that here is just, very, very general. His achievements could be worked on too. So his achievements, finished my college studies, currently working as again, very, very vague. So could definitely be amended. The education here. So this is a good example of how maybe not to lay out your education. So as you can see, he's gone the wrong way around with it. So he's gone from like his beginning of his life nearly to currently. He's included too much detail as well. Like as you can see here, he's included his nursery, which is like when you're a small child, like 4 or 5 years old. His primary school, his secondary school, really not needed at all. So all that he would actually need to put in here is his degree. So, and as you can see, his degree is over here under qualifications, which is also incorrect. So he should just put in his degree, and maybe he could put in his 6th form college, but there's no need to mention the results. So like, as you can see here, he did a bachelor's in psychology, but he doesn't have any detail on that about the subjects he's done or anything like that. But he does have details of what he got in his like equivalent of his leaving cert. So that could be, completely cut down. So, oops, sorry, I'm the wrong sheet. So like the education here could be cut down. His employment could definitely be expanded. So like, as you can see here, he's worked as an IT support assistant for over 10 years we don't know anything about what he does in the job day to day, what the company is, what the key achievements are. So the employment should be definitely built out completely. So that is definitely something that, could be built out. So, and then the skills and experience could be built out also. So this is probably, the extreme of a very bad CV, but there are just things there to note that could be amended, that maybe, might be part of your CVs currently that you could, definitely fix. So a couple of do's and don'ts for a CV. So the first thing to mention is definitely keep your CV to two to 3 pages of A4 paper. There used to always be a kind of a rumor or a kind of a general rule of thumb that your CV should be a page long. So I'd say that's definitely way too short. We would never see CVs that are 1-pagers. It's just too much detail to fit into a page. So a page is definitely too long. The kind of sweet spot would be, 2 pages, maybe even 2.5, but no more than 3. Some CVs we've seen are, up to 5-6 pages, and they're just very, very, very long. Nobody's going to read all that detail. So what you should be, trying to keep it to is kind of 2 to 3 pages, definitely. It's good to keep the language sharp, positive, and focused. What I mean again by sharp, positive, and focused, so we looked here at, let's say, this guy's marital, or not his marital status, his personal summary. This is not sharp, positive, and focused. So this is very, very generalized, very kind of wishy-washy. So what you need to be doing when I say keeping it sharp, positive, and focused is, be stats orientated, focus on statistics. So, how many years experience do you have? Examples of what you did. Those things will stick out in someone's mind if they're reading your CV, definitely. Highlight major accomplishments, strengths, and abilities. So, very, very good tip to do definitely is, highlighting those. Bullet points, short and punchy. So as I said, like you'd be wanting to keep your employment to kind of 7 to 8 bullet points, and keep them concise, keep them to the point, keep them to action words. So words like, communicate with customers daily, even always use examples, always use statistics. So let's say if you're putting down, I don't know, a waitress job in your CV, I would be putting down something like, dealing with up to 50 customers daily, working in a cafe where we turn over, 50 to 60 tables at our busiest periods, dealing with, high-end customers or high-end food or whatever it might be, just to give context. So those kind of things really do make a difference. Strong opening statements. So again, your personal summary is very important part of your CV. It should be very concise. So focus on like your year's experience, what type of a job that you're applying for. So let's say targeting a career in, as a HR generalist, have 8 years experience in multinational companies, whatever it may be. Think your CV as an advertisement of your qualifications. So that's, very true as well. So definitely try to get all of the relevant ones down on paper. Always very important to proofread and get a third party to review and spell check it. So, spell checking it is probably the easiest thing to do. As you know, you can just do that on Word. You can spell check it fully, make sure the spacing and everything looks fine. Always make sure as well that you have it as English, not American English, but I think is it Word English or whatever it's called. I'm trying to think of what it's called. But the reason I say that is the American English can be slightly different in terms of spelling. Like, for example, a word like organized in American English has a Z, whereas in English it has an S. So do always spell check that. After you spell check it though, still get a third party to review it. So definitely print it out, give it to somebody who you trust, somebody whose opinion that you value, and get them to read it and give a few opinions also, just to, you know, get that second opinion. For those of you who, let's say, are non-EU or maybe, you know, don't have the right to work in Ireland or do, it's important to note your eligibility to work in Ireland full-time or part-time. So I see a lot of CVs and they maybe put down their stamp that they're on. So, you know, all non-EU people would have, let's say, a stamp 1, a stamp 4, whatever it might be. So definitely note that on your CV. Include your level of English. So your level of English could be, you know, intermediate, advanced, whatever it might be. And just to go back to the personal statement again, always tailor that for the job. So you don't want to, let's say, apply for some different kind of a job and let's say, you know, leave out your, have a, let's say, a historic personal statement that you haven't changed. So those would be all things that are important to include in your CV. Regarding the don'ts, so don't make your reader dig for information. So I know I've already mentioned this. You don't want your recruiter looking at your CV to be having to go off and Google stuff about the company that you've worked for, about the university. Always just give that information upfront and give context. Do outline everything you've done. Obviously, you are going to be, you know, thinking of the size of the CV, 2 to 3 pages, but don't leave anything important out. Don't include, as I mentioned, personal information such as age, race, marital or health status. No need to include any of those. Definitely don't have your CV too dense or too busy. When I mean busy, a CV like this is quite busy. There's lots of bits and parts and, you know, it's kind of visually not looking that great. So definitely don't have your CV too much detail and too much, too long, you know, 100%. As we mentioned already, the email address. So make sure maybe you have one dedicated email address that looks professional. So an example there, like boozytommy@gmail.com, something like that, you don't need to include, and you should have a professional email address. And don't include a picture either. Some people do include a picture. I would say there is no need to include it. You know, what you look like isn't really relative. So I would leave that off, definitely. Want to give 2 examples to finish the presentation before we get into the question section. So the 2 examples I wanted to give were, now these examples are from LinkedIn, but they are both very good examples of how a person can, I suppose, snapshot their experience on their LinkedIn or on their CV. So this example here is of a person who is a physiotherapist. A lot of people, let's say on their LinkedIn or on their CV, could put down a, you know, just physiotherapist, no detail at all. But as you can see with this person, this is from her LinkedIn. She has down senior physiotherapist, advocate for no tears therapy, supporting people with disabilities, CPD organizer, guest lecturer. So that's something that's really unique to her, really to the point. I read that, I know exactly what this person is all about. I know if they're going to meet my requirements for my job or not. So something like that is a nice example of how you can maybe snapshot yourself on your personal statement on your CV. This is just a relative example to LinkedIn. But that's a a very good example there of how you can make things very clear. And this is just another example. I know you're covering LinkedIn at a different part of this course, but this is also an example of somebody who has created an interesting summary on their LinkedIn. Now, obviously on LinkedIn you have more space, but they focus on their career objectives and what they want to achieve. They use the first person. They create a compelling story about their career. So that is another nice example as well of, how on your LinkedIn or on your CV that you could create, I suppose, an interesting personal summary, definitely. So that concludes the training or the presentation side of things. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Clara now just to see if there was anything else that you wanted to note, or if not, we can jump straight into the questions.
Thanks, Maria. No, I think there was great feedback there on the CV, on the examples that you were working through. And I've gone back with a couple of comments on those as well. But yeah, just interested if anybody has any questions, you want to pop them into the chat. And if there's anything that you were hoping we were going to cover today that we haven't touched on, please speak now and we'll be happy to go into more detail based on your own experiences. But I take that as a sign we've covered everything. All your hopes were and dreams were realized in this this session this morning. We covered everything that you needed to know. Look, I think Maria's covered quite a lot there. It is sometimes a work in progress as you work through your job descriptions. Ruth, I see you putting your hand up there. You have a question.
Okay, I thought maybe you're going to show us a good CV since you have shown us the bad one, or you're coming to that now?
I actually don't have an example of a good CV in the training. I can perhaps maybe circulate one after the training. But yeah, no, that wasn't part of the training today. I was just more focusing on things to maybe avoid.
But
we
do
have that
stuff
on our guide, which will be shared with all the participants. So
Okay.
if Maria, if you do have something ready, we can include that in the material pack that we're going to send to everyone. But we
Okay.
do have a guide that includes that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. There's another question on the chat there. Svetlana is asking about work permits. So would you include a stamp or just permit, or talk about being eligible to work full time?
So I would definitely note your, I think that there is no harm in noting your stamp. So, stamp 4, eligible to work full-time or part-time. A lot of CVs we get would have that. So I would advise to note both of those. So your stamp and your eligibility to work full-time or part-time.
Yeah, I think the issue is when people only write the stamp, or for example, people who are under temporary protection, because then you assume that the recruiter will know if you're eligible or not based on that.
Yeah.
So include both. I got another question here about career gaps, Maria. So where in the CV would the person include that? Would that be part of the employment history?
Yeah, so I'd include that kind of chronologically in the employment history. So if, let's say, there's a gap of, let's say, 3 years between one employment and another, I would just say took career break for, X reason throughout this time. So I'd include it in the employment history and make it chronological, basically.
Great.
Yeah, I actually have a template specific around career breaks that I can send as well, because we've done some work on that previously. And what I would say to people is career breaks are so common. I think people are nervous about disclosing a career break, but for any amount of reasons, people have taken career breaks, whether voluntarily or not. And I think they're really, really common. So it is just about calling it out and explaining you know, as I said, the chronological flow of your career. So don't be worried about doing that. I think it's nearly unusual at this point if people don't have some sort of a break in their career. And just coming back to the work permit piece as well, I think, you know, Maria's mentioned it there. It's really about trying to make life easy for the person who's reviewing your CV. And if you think about how many hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications that recruiters have to look through, don't assume they understand the employment status or the visa types and things like that. In large organizations, typically they will, but not in every organization. So if you can add just that little bit of detail, it certainly helps. You just want to create a little bit of curiosity around your CV, but anywhere where you can kind of answer a question in the CV succinctly, I would suggest do that. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming through in the chat, but does anybody, Ruth, your hand is still up, is it? You have another one? You're on, do you want to go ahead?
You're on mute, Ruth.
Okay.
Let me see if I can.
So I wanted to ask about the English. Since I'm from a foreign land, how do I grade my type of English, whether it's elementary or advanced? How do I know which type of English I am when I'm doing that? Because sometimes there's a question when you are filling some of the form, they will need that. Are you in which level of English are you in? How do I know about my English?
I think I can take that.
Do you want to take that one, Talita? Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so you can, there are kind of short assessments online that you can do. So the way that it's usually laid out is elementary, intermediary, upper intermediary, advanced. You can say fluent as well. But if you don't know your level of English, I would suggest doing one of those. They're free, they're online assessments, and it will give you your exact level, and you can actually prove that your level, that's your level of English by showing that you have taken the exam, if that makes sense. Sorry, Clara or Maria, if you have anything to add, please go ahead.
No, I think that's try and get some sort of a benchmark. Again, it just kind of helps the recruiters to kind of understand what standard is there. Some employers do add a little explanation. So they might say, you know, conversation, can you hold a conversation? Can you hold a business level conversation? And they might give you some indication so that you can help to kind of set where your fluency is. But I think it's always good to say, I have achieved X standard in this online test as well. That definitely helps.
And if for the role that you're looking for, Ruth, if it's more like if you're only going to be speaking to customers, you can mention that. So in this assessment, you're going to get different grades for speaking, reading, listening. So you can mention if you have a stronger spoken English, you can mention that because it's more important to the role, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? I think everyone was very happy with the presentation. It covered everything.
That's good.
Great.
Well, what I might do is just ping myself and Maria's LinkedIn profiles into the chat before we finish up. So feel free to grab those links and connect with us on LinkedIn. If anybody has any follow-up questions, we're happy to answer those. And I'll share with you, Talita, the template that we have around career breaks, because that with the CV guide that you have produced, I think might help people. But look, we're happy to review if there's if you've drafted a CV and you want a second opinion, you know, please let us know. Talk to Talita and we can organize that.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria and Clara. That was great. Thanks everyone for attending. And if you have any questions, you have my email address, so you can reach out at any time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.